Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, give a like, and don't forget to leave a comment. Enjoy watching.
Carl Bennett always had that damn rehearsed grin, the kind of corporate smile that showed all teeth but no soul, the kind that always came right before something got taken away. It was a Wednesday morning, still early enough that the break room coffee tasted like cardboard and bitterness, when he called me into conference room B, the one with the big fake plant and the soundproof glass that made every bad meeting feel like a fishbowl interrogation. I had a gut feeling the moment he sent the invite with the subject line "Quick Sync." Anyone who's been in the game long enough knows that quick sync is executive code for "you're screwed." Carl sat there in his navy blazer with the pocket square that matched the marketing rebrand we rolled out last quarter, an attempt to look premium to clients while cutting everybody's bonuses by 15%. Across from him sat Sarah, the new HR girl fresh out of college, who looked like she was about to puke. She couldn't meet my eyes. She held a manila folder in her lap like it was a grenade. "Jake," Carl said, smiling like we were old friends meeting for lunch instead of what this really was, "you've been such a foundational piece of this team's journey. Truly." He steepled his fingers like some kind of discount philosopher and went on, "But the company's at a pivot point. We're looking toward the future, toward younger, hungrier talent who really live and breathe the digital-first world." I let him finish his little monologue about evolving markets and brand synergy before I said a word. Not because I was speechless, but because I was stunned at just how casually a man could discard someone who brought in 40% of the company's damn revenue the previous year. 40%. That's not a typo. I wasn't just doing my job. I was the job. I cleared my throat, not because I was nervous, but because I was fighting the urge to laugh. "So let me get this straight," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You're firing the guy who landed Belridge, Westbrook Logistics, and the multi-year O'Connell contract. The same guy who onboarded 2 junior teams when the budget cuts gutted training. The same guy who worked Christmas Eve because the junior account exec had a meltdown on the Jameson project. That guy." Carl shifted in his seat, still smiling like a Botox commercial. "You've been incredible, Jake. No one's questioning that. But we're evolving. We need people who understand the landscape. Trends. TikTok. That kind of thing." I almost laughed out loud then me, a man who once saved our flagship client after the VP sent an email with a pricing error that could have cost us 6 figures, being replaced because I didn't do viral dances or say vibe check. Sarah slid the folder across the table like it was a truce offering. Inside was the same generic severance agreement they probably used for everyone: 2 months of pay, NDA clauses in bold, and a polite threat in legalese if I decided to make noise. I didn't touch it. Not yet. Now, here's where some people lose their cool. Flip the table. Scream about loyalty. Burn it all down. But that's not how you get even. I stood up, smoothed my shirt, looked Carl straight in his surgically freshened face, and said, "Good luck hitting Q3 without me." Then I left. No drama. Just facts. But let me back up for a second, because you need to understand something. I wasn't some deadweight legacy employee trying to coast to retirement. I was 47. Still sharp, still hungry, still beating projections in a company that was running on fumes and management jargon. I had a kid about to start college, a mortgage that didn't care about pivots, and a wife who stayed up late with me proofreading proposals when the interns didn't know what a clause was. I gave this place 12 years. I gave it weekends. Birthdays. The day my dad passed, I still closed the Barton deal because no one else knew the account. And how did they thank me? By handing my role to Ryan, the golden boy with expensive hair and a resume built entirely out of buzzwords and buzzcuts. Ryan was Carl's pet project. A junior strategist with a TikTok channel where he reviewed productivity apps and used words like grind set, without irony. I'd been watching him hover around meetings he didn't belong in, laughing a little too hard at Carl's dumb jokes, volunteering for projects that I'd already done all the groundwork on. That should have been the first clue. But I ignored it. I thought results still meant something. They don't. Not anymore. And you know what stings the most? It's not the disrespect. It's not the blindsiding. It's that part of me, the stubborn, loyal part, still cared. Even as I walked out with a cardboard box full of stress balls and thank you cards from clients who probably didn't even know I was gone, I cared about how this whole thing would shake out. I knew they'd fumble the handoff. I knew they didn't understand how deep my systems went. But part of me wanted to be wrong. I wanted to believe that Carl had some master plan, some vision that justified pushing out the people who built the damn scaffolding he stood on. Spoiler alert, he didn't. You ever been in a position where you watched your whole career dissolve in a 20-minute meeting, and the person across from you pretended it was a strategic realignment, instead of what it really was, age discrimination wrapped in startup speak? Be honest, have you ever dreamed of getting revenge on a manager like that? The kind that smiled while slowly turning the knife? Because I didn't scream. I didn't punch a wall. I didn't call my lawyer, not yet. What I did was go quiet. I sat down that night at my dining table, opened my laptop, and started remembering every little thing they forgot I knew. The passwords, the workflows, the undocumented fixes, the way Carl liked to round up quarterly numbers for board calls, the things that weren't illegal, but weren't clean, either. I wasn't looking to go nuclear. Not yet. But I had time. And Carl, he had deadlines. Deadlines I used to cover without him even knowing. Deadlines that were about to haunt the people who smiled while pushing me out the door. And trust me, ghosts like me don't go quietly. It didn't take long, barely 3 weeks, maybe 4, before the seams started to split and the whole shiny, rebranded ship began to list sideways like a yacht run by interns with degrees and buzzwords. From the comfort of my kitchen table, I watched the first cracks appear through LinkedIn posts, sudden job listings, and awkward status updates from people who used to copy my templates and now pretended they'd invented the workflow themselves. Carl Bennett hadn't even bothered to announce my departure properly, just scrubbed my name from the leadership highlights deck and tossed Ryan into my seat like the kid had earned it by more than just smiling through Zoom meetings and knowing what threads meant on Twitter. Ryan, as I suspected, was already floundering like a fish on a marble floor. He had the hair, the suits, the talk, all flash, no wait. Clients weren't impressed by a 20-something who used phrases like lean into frictionless scalability and couldn't remember the time difference between Chicago and London. It was almost painful to watch him try to improvise his way through a quarterly call with Westbrook, a client I'd nursed through 2 buyouts and a PR disaster. Now sitting there stone-faced on the call, while Ryan fumbled a jargon salad and promised timelines that were already weeks behind. I heard about it from Cassie, an assistant over at Westbrook who used to email me on Sunday nights with little reminders and jokes about how I saved her team's bacon on more than one occasion. She texted me after the call. It was like watching a student try to lecture the professor, she wrote. He doesn't even know we use a custom billing structure. You always remembered. That one hit a little deeper than I expected. I was drinking burnt diner coffee that morning, the kind I never had time for when I was pulling 16-hour days, and it hit me. They didn't just underestimate me. They never understood the work I actually did. Carl thought I was just a senior sales guy who lucked into some big accounts, like he never noticed I rewrote half the onboarding process myself after our 3rd CRM meltdown, or that I coached 2 entire client teams into retention when the new software rollout scared them off. The systems held because I held them. Quietly, constantly, without applause. But now, deadlines were slipping. KPIs were red. Clients were going radio silent, which is always worse than angry, because silence means they're already planning an exit. And the funny part? I wasn't even trying yet. Not really. I was sipping coffee, scrolling job boards, and making polite calls to old colleagues and places that mattered. Not looking for work, not exactly. Just checking the temperature. Saying things like, you hear what's going on at Devon Group? Whole leadership pivot. Looks like they're bleeding from the inside, and listening for the chuckles, the confirmations, the behind-the-scenes panic that always leaks from the edges. But here's the truth most execs never understand until it's too late. You don't need to break something to destroy it. You just need to stop holding it together. They took me out of the system, and the system stalled. No more quiet adjustments before meetings, no more invisible coverage for missed prep work, no more overnight deck cleanups when someone botched the layout. Ryan couldn't see the difference. He thought the job was about meetings and momentum. He didn't know it was about catching landmines before they exploded. Belridge sent their first angry email 2 weeks after I left. I didn't see it, obviously, but I heard about it from Trish, one of their project leads who still had my personal number saved from our crisis call last winter. She messaged me short and brutal. Your replacement doesn't know our contract. Told us we had to change platforms. We're shopping new partners. You free? I didn't answer. Not yet. But I smiled. It felt good. I won't lie. I wasn't above a little petty satisfaction, watching the tower I built start to lean just enough to scare the people who thought they were kings. And I started to think, maybe, just maybe, I wasn't done yet. Not with revenge. That's too big a word, too obvious. I wanted precision. A little pressure here, a little tug there. I knew where all the wires ran. I knew which light bulbs were held in by friction and hope. So I made another call, this time to Louis Tran, my old contact at Insight Partners, a private equity firm with fingers in all the right pies. We hadn't spoken in 6 months. He picked up fast. "Jake? Thought you'd be running Devon by now." I laughed and said, "Got a better idea. Just wanted to ask, you still looking at Devon's Q3 filings? You might want to double-check their forecasts." He paused, just for a moment. But I knew that pause. That pause meant he was going to look. That pause meant someone on a higher floor was going to raise an eyebrow. And once the eyebrows go up, the spreadsheets follow. Now here's where it gets interesting. The company didn't know I was watching. They didn't know I still had access to a few shared folders they forgot to shut down. They didn't know I still had the Slack export from the week the London office melted down, and more importantly, they didn't know I'd been quietly archiving key email threads, invoices, and a little gem of a presentation where Carl knowingly inflated revenue projections to secure a bonus. I wasn't planning to go full whistleblower yet, but I was building something. A story, a timeline, and every missed deadline, every client lost, every silent whisper from an old contact just added another brushstroke. Because deadlines don't lie. They just wait, quietly, patiently, and then they speak all at once. The house I helped build was starting to shake, and all I had to do was sit back and listen. The collapse hadn't happened yet, but I could hear the beams groaning. And God help them when they start falling. They thought I'd walk away clean, head down, ego bruised but obedient, like some outdated piece of furniture quietly carted off to the junk heap with a polite thank you and a non-disclosure. What they didn't realize, what Carl and his bootlicking, buzzword-addled sidekick Ryan never figured out, was that I didn't just work the system. I documented it. Every client, every deal, every internal lie they tried to hide under the rug, I wrote it down. Not because I planned to use it. At the time, I just wanted to remember the shape of things in case they fell apart. Turns out, I was just a little ahead of schedule. It started as a habit back when the company was still small enough to fit in a single floor of a second-rate downtown building with bad air conditioning and flickering lights. Back then, everything was on the edge of chaos. No processes, no manuals, just 10 of us wearing too many hats and praying our clients didn't figure out how duct-taped everything really was. That's when I began keeping the file. Just a Word doc at first, then a Google Sheet. Call logs, deal notes, who took credit for what, who passed the buck when something went sideways. Every time Carl swept something under the rug, I wrote it down partly to cover my own ass, partly because I didn't trust memory alone in a place that shifted stories faster than budgets. Fast forward a decade, and that file had turned into a living archive, folder upon folder of annotated deal flows, client notes, time-stamped emails, internal memos, screenshots of Slack conversations that mysteriously disappeared from the channel history. When they pushed me out, they forgot that the man they were replacing with a TikTok guru was also the unofficial historian of their company's rot. One night, a week after I'd watched Ryan botch the Belridge renewal like a freshman selling to a Fortune 500 exec, I opened the archive again. I poured a drink, sat down at my desk, and scrolled through years of corporate amnesia, the kind no rebrand or mission statement can whitewash. One email caught my eye, flagged in red. A chain from 3 years ago. It was about a forecast discrepancy, the kind that doesn't seem like a big deal until you realize it led to Carl's bonus being approved under numbers that were quietly adjusted by our then finance lead under pressure from upstairs. The fun part? The client whose name was being inflated on that forecast, Grinwell Tech, had no idea they were being used as a balloon for executive compensation. I know that because I handled that account personally, and the numbers never match what Carl sent upstairs. I confronted him about it once, low-key, during a coffee run. He waved it off, told me I was thinking too small and to focus on growth, not compliance. I wrote that down too. So I made a new Gmail account, tossed the email chain in with a brief note typed in all lowercase for effect. Saw this, thought you should know. Check the math. And sent it to Grinwell's procurement head. I didn't even include my name. Didn't need to. That email chain had timestamps, attachments, and enough embedded metadata to cause a small corporate aneurysm. 2 days later, the first ripple hit. It came in the form of a question, an innocuous line buried in an update thread. Can we confirm client approval of these reported numbers for 2021 Q4? Harmless, unless you knew what it meant. I recognized the phrasing because I used to write those updates. It was the polite version of someone's checking under the hood and something doesn't smell right. Then I got a text from an old friend in finance, a guy named Mark who'd quietly moved to another firm last year. They're digging. Grenwell flagged your name in a review. Carl's freaking out. I stared at the message for a while. Not because I was afraid, but because that was just the first domino, and I had plenty more. By the following week, HR was scrambling. I could tell because they started posting team culture initiatives on LinkedIn, a sure sign they were trying to distract employees from whatever mess was brewing in the executive suite. Sarah from HR, the same one who slid my severance across the table like she was defusing a bomb, suddenly had a new title, Director of People and Performance, which meant damage control. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Meanwhile, Carl stopped posting his usual Monday motivation videos where he stood in front of abstract art and talked about courageous leadership. Instead, he went quiet. Radio silent. But Ryan, oh, sweet oblivious Ryan, kept chirping. He even posted a selfie from the office with the caption, "Pushing limits, chasing excellence." The only thing he was chasing was a calendar full of reschedules and ghosted calls. That week, I pulled another file, one about the Jameson launch. The one I saved after Carl ignored legal's advice on the licensing language, rolled it out anyway, and hoped nobody would notice the fine print gap that could have tanked the entire warranty clause. I remember staying up until 3 a.m. patching the legal doc manually so our ass wouldn't get sued. Carl never mentioned it again. Pretended it was always airtight. But I kept the email thread, the warning from legal, Carl's reply, my corrections. It wasn't a bomb by itself, but as part of the pattern. It was gasoline. You see, they didn't push me out because I was old. Not really. That was just the cover story. They pushed me out because I knew too much, too many shortcuts, too many fake numbers, too many corners cut under pressure. I was a risk. Not because I was dangerous, but because I remembered. Every company builds its success on someone's invisible labor, on the people who show up before the sun and leave after the lights are off, the ones who clean the mess quietly so the boardroom can stay polished. I was one of those people. And when they tossed me aside, they assumed I'd vanish with the mess. But ghosts don't vanish. They haunt. And now, with every forwarded file, every anonymous tip, every whisper that caused a ripple in the shallow waters Carl was trying to tread, I was building something bigger. The question wasn't whether they'd fall. The question was how hard. The first job offer came in while I was still brushing toast crumbs off my t-shirt, sitting barefoot at the kitchen counter with an open laptop and an inbox full of LinkedIn recruiters using phrases like, "Your experience is uniquely aligned with our vision." It was flattering in the same way a magician pulling a coin from your ear is flattering, a nice trick, but too late and too hollow. The offer came from a mid-tier agency with delusions of scale, one I'd quietly outperformed for 3 straight quarters without even breaking a sweat. They wanted me to drive strategic growth initiatives under a VP who, ironically, once sat through my webinar and quoted my slide deck like it was gospel. I turned them down without a second thought, because I wasn't done yet. This thing I was doing, this slow, deliberate reckoning, wasn't about bitterness or pride or proving something to anyone. It was about watching the whole machine sputter, inch by inch, without me. And more than that, it was about making sure they knew exactly why it was happening, even if they never saw my face again. That same week, Devon missed another major deadline. Westbrook Logistics, the whale I'd reeled in and kept fed for almost 4 years, issued a polite but devastating press release. The kind with corporate language so dry it hurts, where reevaluating our partnership actually means we're never calling you again. Buried 2 paragraphs in, between the expected phrases like alignment review and long-term compatibility, was the line that made me nearly spit out my coffee. In light of recent inconsistencies in communication and contractual clarity, we are pausing all renewals pending a full audit. That wasn't just a knife. That was surgical steel, right into the muscle. Because if there's one thing Carl's board couldn't stomach, it was the word audit. It meant someone was counting the marbles and realizing the bag was short. I didn't make the press release happen for the record. I didn't have to. All I did was sit back and let them try to navigate the mess they made without a map. Every skipped handoff, every ignored warning, every budget fudge, and we'll circle back that went untracked. It was finally catching up. It always does. That's the part these trend-chasing VPs never learn. You can fake the buzzwords, but you can't fake the grind. Carl, now desperate to understand why the floor was falling out from under him, launched what he called a confidential compliance audit, which was really just code for find the mole. They didn't know if someone inside was leaking things, and that uncertainty alone was enough to send the executive team into full lockdown mode. Passwords were changed. Slack channels were renamed. Staff were pulled into sudden, uncomfortable one-on-ones. Ryan, now clearly out of his depth, sent out a tone-deaf all-hands video message about leaning into chaos as a growth opportunity, which only made things worse. And while all that unfolded, while Carl and his team hunted ghosts in their own walls, I poured myself a glass of Cabernet and called Devin. Now, Devin wasn't a major player. Not yet. He was an intern back in 2019, sharp as hell, with a chip on his shoulder and a knack for asking the questions everyone else avoided. I taught him how to write client narratives that didn't sound like cut-and-paste templates. He listened, took notes, and swore one day he'd build something that made sense. He left a year later, went to a smaller firm, then another, then started his own little shop with 2 other disillusioned analysts. And now? Now they were hungry, competent, and ready to take clients away from people who thought LinkedIn posts counted as strategy. We hadn't talked in months, but I knew he'd pick up. He always did. When I told him I had a list of under-supported accounts with weak documentation and confused liaisons, he didn't ask how I got the list. He just said, "How many accounts and how soon can we make the switch look natural?" Within a week, one of Devrin's mid-tier clients, a 7-figure contract, if I remember right, quietly requested a termination clause review. No drama, just a perfectly timed ask that opened the door for Devin's team to slide in with a smoother, more transparent offer. All above board, all legal. But when that client dropped Devrin for platform reliability concerns, it triggered an internal audit of account support procedures. Carl was forced to answer to the board for churn acceleration. Ryan claimed he had it under control. Everyone knew he didn't. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just watching a fire anymore. I was guiding it. Not with gasoline, not with dynamite, but with well-placed gusts of wind, fanning the flames they lit themselves. And the best part? They still didn't know it was me. Every time I passed by their latest job listings or saw yet another resignation announcement from someone I used to share late-night deadlines with, I didn't feel guilty. I felt like I was setting something straight. Because the truth is, Carl and his ilk never respected the people who kept the gears turning. They saw us as furniture. Replaceable. But they never understood that some of us were the architecture. Take us out, and the building doesn't fall, it sinks. They wanted trendsetters. They got trend chasers. And the trend now is exit. There's a moment in every downfall when the hunters realize they've become prey. Carl hadn't reached that moment yet, but he was close. You could smell it on him, the panic behind his glassy optimism, the way he stopped responding to direct emails and started delegating everything to people already looking for other jobs. Me? I didn't even need to lift a finger anymore. Just kept the wine flowing, kept the calls quiet, kept the doors open for people looking for lifeboats. Because the hunter had become the ghost. And ghosts never sleep. The invitation came in an embossed envelope like it was 1993 again, gold trim, heavy cardstock, trying too hard to scream prestige, while everyone in the industry whispered behind closed doors about layoffs, budget freezes, and quietly vanishing clients. It was the Devrin Group's annual gala, a black tie event hosted under the laughable pretense of celebrating innovation and market leadership, even as their stock charts looked more like ski slopes than growth curves. They sent it, I assume, out of muscle memory, my name still somewhere on an old VIP list, a relic of the years when I used to hold this company's spine together without asking for a thank you. I hadn't planned to go. Not at first. What purpose would it serve, I told myself, to walk into a room full of overly perfumed ambition and feigned civility, where the same people who clapped me out the door with hollow smiles would pretend not to see me as they chased hors d'oeuvres and funding rounds. But the night before the event, I found myself staring at the invitation again, a glass of scotch in my hand, the lights dim, and a very particular idea forming not of confrontation, not of vengeance, but of punctuation, an ending, or at least a question mark at the end of a very long, very crooked sentence. I shaved. I wore the good suit, the tailored one, navy, sharp enough to cut. I arrived fashionably late, just in time to make an entrance without making a scene. The venue was all glass and steel and lighting effects designed to distract from the increasingly hollow center of the empire it represented. I saw familiar faces. Some looked away. A few offered nods. One guy, Ted from Product, actually shook my hand like we were war buddies who'd survived a shipwreck together, which, in a way, we had. Carl Bennett was standing near the bar, laughing with someone from PR, his hair a little thinner, his smile a little stiffer than the last time we met across that soundproof conference table. He didn't see me at first. But when he did, and he did, the smile faltered. Just for a split second. Just long enough to tell me he remembered everything I wanted him to. The Grenville leak. The missed renewals. The internal chaos that couldn't be blamed on market volatility anymore. He approached cautiously, like a man trying to decide whether the shadow in the alley is a threat or just the wind. "Jake," he said, voice too bright, too controlled, like he was on stage and couldn't remember the next line. "Didn't expect to see you here." I smiled. A real one. No teeth. Just calm. "Neither did I said, pausing long enough for the weight to settle between us. Then I leaned in slightly, not touching him, not threatening, but close enough for only him to hear. "By the way," I said, "you ever fix that Jameson clause? Or did you just hope no one ever checked the attachments?" His face didn't move. Not really. But something behind his eyes twitched, recognition, maybe fear, maybe both. Because that clause, that little legal hole he ordered pushed through over objections, was still buried in a dozen contracts. I knew it. He knew I knew it. I wasn't saying I'd done anything. I wasn't saying I would. But I also wasn't saying I wouldn't. "Take care of yourself, Carl," I said, turning before he could find whatever bland retort he had queued up. I didn't look back. 3 days later, he resigned. Personal reasons, the press release said. No details, no fanfare, just a quiet drop-off at the curb of corporate memory. The same day, Devron's stock slid hard, a 10% drop that triggered a secondary review from a board that suddenly remembered how many red flags they'd ignored for the sake of quarterly optics. Ryan vanished off social media. I heard rumors of a restructuring, whispers of outside audits, a rumor that HR had brought in consultants to track internal correspondence. Too little, too late. People started connecting dots they'd ignored for too long. The board reshuffled. A new interim CEO stepped in, someone from outside who used phrases like "back to basics" and "restoring trust," as though a fresh coat of paint could fix cracked foundations. The house still stood, sure, but the lights inside were flickering. And me? I went home. I didn't post about it. I didn't call a reporter. I didn't frame the severance letter or turn the emails into some righteous manifesto. I just poured another drink, stepped out onto my porch, and let the wind carry the silence of victory or something close to it. Because the truth is, there are no clean wins in stories like this. No dramatic curtain calls. Just people left with the weight of what they chose and what they lost in the process. I've asked myself a few times since that night if I went too far. If I could have taken the high road, walked away, started something new without looking back at the burning bridge. But the truth is, sometimes the bridge needs to burn. Not to punish, but to light the way for everyone still stuck in the shadows. I didn't destroy Devron. I didn't have to. I just stopped holding it together. The last deadline wasn't a project or a pitch or a quarterly report. It was the moment Carl realized the past he buried didn't stay quiet. It had a name. It had dates. It had teeth. And it knew where he lived. I didn't get my job back. I didn't want it. What I got was peace. The kind you earn. The kind you taste. The kind you keep. And maybe, just maybe, I became exactly the kind of ghost they should have been afraid of from the start.